Chapter 5. Counselor Borst Failure looked up from the datapad. His violet eyes dilated. His cream-colored fur flattened tightly against his body. So, it has finally come to light, he whispered. Yes, it has, Leia said, and it demands an explanation. Failure shook his head. There is nothing to explain, he said softly. It is true. I see, Leia said, feeling a heaviness settle across her shoulders. She hadn't realized how hard she'd been hoping that Card had been right about the Kamas record being a forgery. You're certain? Yes, Failure said, his gaze drifting away from Leia to the datapad again. Then you know who was involved? No, Failure said. That is the core of the problem, Counselor Organa Solo, and the reason we have been silent over this for so long. We know only what you now know, that a group of Bothans helped agents of Senator Palpatine gain access to the Kamas shield generators. We don't even know the clan involved, let alone the specific individuals. Did you try to find out? Leia asked bluntly. Failure's fur rippled. Of course we did. But Palpatine had covered his trail far too well. It was only long after the event, in the early days of the rebellion, that the chief clan leaders even became aware of Bothan complicity at Kamas. It was our shock at that revelation, in fact, that moved us to dedicate our people to the Rebel Alliance and Palpatine's downfall. But the trail was by then too old to follow. Leia sighed. I understand. You believe me, don't you? Failure persisted. You must believe me. For a moment, Leia didn't speak. Gazing into his face, reaching out with the Force, she searched as best she could for any hint of deception. But if it was there, she couldn't find it. I believe you're telling the truth, at least as far as you know it, she told the Bothan. Unfortunately, I'm not the only one you'll have to convince. Failure shivered, random clumps of his fur stiffening across his body. No, he agreed soberly. There will be many who will believe we are merely protecting the criminals in the name of Bothan solidarity. Leia picked up the datapad, suppressing a grimace. He was certainly right about that. The Bothan approach to interstellar politics was far more biting and pop and topple than many in the New Republic cared for. Even species who thought nothing of all-out physical combat between themselves generally tried to moderate their approach when dealing with outsiders. The fact that the Bothans were either unable or unwilling to do likewise had earned them more than their fair share of ill will in diplomatic circles. I agree, she said. All the more reason to get this resolved as quickly as possible. But how? Failure asked. The Bothans have searched long and hard for a list of those responsible, both in the official clan libraries on Bothawui, as well as on all our colony worlds and enclaves. It simply doesn't exist. It existed here, Leia pointed out, pulling the data card from the datapad. I'm convinced it did. We can see if the text can reconstruct it. If they can't, we'll just have to locate another copy somewhere. At least now we know what to look for. We can try, Failure said doubtfully. But in the meantime, what do you plan to do? Leia fingered the data card. I can't just forget the whole thing, Counselor Failure. You have to understand that. I have to at least take it to the rest of the High Council. But I'll do what I can to persuade President Gaversom that it shouldn't be made public. At least not until the techs have had time to see what they can do with the ruined sections. I see, Failure said, his fur and emotions both rippling. Whether the techs will keep silent is of course another question. More important, what about the smuggler Talon Card? You said he also knows. He's given his promise that he won't say anything, Leia told him. And he has a message out to the rest of his people to watch for the Deveronian who found the data card. Maybe they can catch up with him before he tells anyone else. Failure sniffed. You really think he hasn't already told others, after the way you and Card treated him? We did what we deemed necessary at the time, Leia said, sternly ordering down her sudden flash of annoyance with the Bothan. Would you rather he had left Wayland with a data card? To be blunt, yes, Thalia said stiffly. Clearly, we were his intended recipients. He would have demanded the tremendous sum of money from us, and we would have paid him, and it would have been over. Leia sighed. It wouldn't have been over, Counselor. It won't be over until the whole truth is known and those responsible punished. That is indeed all that is left to us now, Thalia said, standing up. Thank you for your courtesy in giving me this private briefing, Counselor Organa. I will go now to prepare my defense. You're not on trial here, Counselor, Leia reminded him. Thalia's fur flattened. I will be, he said softly, as will the entire Bothan race. You will see. The Dona Laza Tap Cafe was about as crowded as Shada Dukal had ever seen it, packed almost literally wall to wall with beings of a dozen different species in every social class, from lower middle on down. Popular place tonight, she commented to her boss, sitting close beside her at the table. It's their turn at the floating Bagaminok tournament, Mazik explained, idly stroking the back of Shada's hand. You wouldn't believe how crazy they go for the game around here. You suppose that's why he chose this place? Shada asked. Because of the crowd? Don't worry. Krampf will bring him in okay, Mazik soothed her. Pass him enough money and he becomes positively reliable, especially when the second half of the payment doesn't come until delivery. Shada looked at the beings pressing around their table. I'm more concerned about whether we'll be able to pull him out of here quietly with this many people watching. There's no rush on that, Mazik said. Considering all the trouble we've gone to, we ought to at least hear this deep, dark secret he wants to tell us. After that, we can see about putting the restraints on him. Shada looked at him out of the corner of her eye. Card won't be happy about that, she warned. He was very specific about Lakjit not talking to anyone. We're not on Talon Card's pay list, Mazik reminded her tartly. What with Crump's finder's fee, we're not going to break even on this as it is. If this little secret has any market value, we deserve to get a cut of it. Shada turned away from him, a wave of blackness flowing over her already dark mood. That was always what it came down to in the world of smuggling. Profit and more profit, and doing whatever scheming and backblading it took to get as much of it as possible. Concepts like loyalty and honor. Ah, come on, Shada, Mazik chided, stroking her hand again. These bursts of personal guilt have got to stop. This is how the game is played. You know that. Sure, Shada murmured. She knew all right. What hurt the most was that for the past 12 years she'd been a willing participant in it. Willing and very able. Sometimes, late at night, she wondered what had happened to the galaxy. Or perhaps it was just her. At the near edge of the crowd, a young Garus appeared, easing himself and his loaded tray gingerly between a pair of loud and wildly gesticulating Ashori. He made it without spilling the drinks, and wilted into the seat across from Mazik. Whew! He half-whistled, picking up one of the 4 drinks from the tray, his purple-tinged gillis flaps undulating rhythmically as he breathed. Didn't think I was going to make it. And a fine job you did too, Krampf, Mazik assured him, selecting 2 of the other glasses and setting one in front of Shada. Any sign of our quarry yet? I didn't see him, Krampf said, skipping carefully as his drink and looking nervously around him. One ear cluster opened briefly as someone nearby gave a raucous laugh, then closed down again. I don't like this, Mazik. Too many here watch. Don't worry, Mazik soothed. You just get him to the table. We'll do the rest. Beside Shada's left ear, one of the decorative lacquered needles twisted into her hair gave 2 soft clicks. Signal from Griv, she told Mazik. Possible make. Good, Mazik said. Go get him, Krampf. Side entrance. Concentrate on the other half of your finder's fee. The Garus half-whistled as he got up from the table and disappeared again into the crowd. Shada took a deep breath, settling into combat mode, and gave the area around them a final examination. If the Deveronian smelled trouble and tried to bolt, he'd probably head to his left. And then Crump was back, a horn-headed Deveronian in tow. "Ugh," he half-whistled, sitting down beside Mazik. "Crowd in here. This Lackjit. This smug, Mazik." "Pleased to meet you, Lackjit," Mazik said, offering him the fourth glass from their tray. "Your drink? Vistulo Brandel, I trust." "When someone else is paying," Lackjit said, taking the seat across from Mazik. "I want you to know first, Mazik, that though what I am about to tell you is true, I know I cannot ask for money in exchange. I no longer have tangible proof, only the evidence of my own eyes." "I understand," Mazik said, setting his hand down in the center of the table. He withdrew it, revealing the short stack of high-denomination coins. "Still, a respectable gentleman should be willing to pay for value received." Lackjit smiled his thin Deveronian smile and reached for the coins, and found his wrist locked solidly in Mazik's grip. "For value received," he reminded Jit coldly. Reaching out with the other hand, he slid the stack of coins back to the edge of the table in front of him. "Now," he said, releasing the Deveronian's wrist, "let's hear what you have." Lackjit hunched forward to lean across the table. "Understand that what I am about to tell you is both private and exclusive," he murmured. "No one else outside the New Republic government knows this." "Of course," Mazik said dryly, his tone making it clear to Shada that he didn't believe that any more than she did. The Deveronian had probably already sold this same exclusive information to a half-dozen other people. "Let's hear it." Lackjit glanced around and hunched a little closer. "It concerns Kamas," he said. "There exists evidence that it was indeed agents of then-Senator Palpatine who engineered its destruction." Beneath the table, Shada felt her hand curl into a hard fist. Kamas. It had been a long time since she'd thought about that world. A long time since she'd tried to block its name and the childhood memories it evoked of her own world of Emberline from her mind. Now suddenly, it was all coming back. She wouldn't have expected Mazik to be equally moved, and he wasn't. "Hardly groundbreaking news," he said with a shrug. "That's been the leading theory practically since the last Kamasi firestorm burned itself out." "But this is proof," Lackjit insisted. "A record recovered from the Emperor's personal storehouse on Wayland." "A document you don't happen to have." "But there's more," the Deveronian hissed, leaning forward until his horns were almost touching Mazik's forehead. "We now know how it was that the planet was so easily destroyed. The shield generators were deliberately sabotaged." He jabbed a finger across the table for emphasis. "By a group of Bothans." Mazik shot Shada a glance. "Really?" he said, his voice still nonchalant, but with a definite note of interest behind it. "You know their names?" "Unfortunately not," Lackjit said. "That part of the document was too badly damaged for my humble datapad to read." He leaned back again in his chair. "But I suggest it doesn't matter. Either way, the Bothans are in for an exceedingly rough time. A clever businessman should be able to make a profit from knowledge of such imminent instability." He gestured to the stack of coins in front of Mazik. "Wouldn't you agree?" "I would indeed," Mazik said, looking at Shada and twitching an eyebrow. "Very well. Shada, would you assist our friend?" "No need," Lackjit said. Leaning forward across the table again, he reached out for the coins. And rising half from her seat, Shada jabbed the knuckles of her right hand at the base of his leftmost horn. He went down without a whimper, dropping face first onto the table, his leftmost horn almost but not quite knocking over Mazik's drink. A Barabel and a couple of Duros glanced over and then looked away. Passed out customers were apparently a common sight at the Donna Laza. "Whee!" Crump wheezed, staring bulge-eyed at the limp form. "Is he not?" "Of course not," Mazik said, reaching over to tap the needle-shaped signaler in Shada's hair 3 times. "No one's paying us to kill anyone." Pushing his way through the crowd, Griv appeared at the table. Ready? He asked. Ready. Mazak nodded and scooped up the stack of coins. He handed Crump 4 of them, dropped the rest into his inside pocket. Get him out to the speeder. Griv hoisted the Deveroni into his shoulder and pushed his way back into the crowd. Well, that was a waste of time, Mazak commented, standing up and courteously offering Shada a hand. Maybe we can bargain up Card's bounty a little. Try to at least come out even. We're not going to do anything with this? Shada asked. Don't be silly, he chided, taking her arm and guiding her into the crowd. Who's going to care about a planet destroyed almost half a century ago? Shada's stomach tightened. Camas. And Emberline. No one, she agreed bitterly. No one at all. It took a while. At least 2 complete read-throughs each, Disra estimated as he slowly paced the floor behind his ivory desk, trying to look impatient rather than apprehensive. But eventually, the last of the 4 Imperial captains finished reading and lifted his eyes from his datapad. With all due respect, Your Excellency, I find this proposal incredible, Captain Trazyn of the Obliterator said, his soft voice belying his reputation for viciousness. Surely you realize that you can't simply pull 4 Imperial Star Destroyers out of a sector fleet and expect the remaining forces to adequately defend their territory. I agree, Captain Nalgal of the Tyrannic put in, fingering the Kuat family crest ring he always wore. In addition, and also with due respect, I would go so far as to question your authority to even order these 2 missions. All incursions into New Republic space are supposed to be under the direct command of Supreme Fleet Commander Pelion. Perhaps, Disra said. Perhaps not. We'll put that aside for a moment. Are there other questions? I have one, Captain Dorja, the Relentless spoke up. This mission to Morishim that you want me to go on. What exactly is this courier ship I'm being asked to intercept? Disra lifted his eyebrows. Being asked, Captain. Being asked? Yes, Your Excellency, Dorja said stiffly. Captain Nalgal is correct. You are Supreme Commander of the Braxton Sector Fleet only with regard to operations within Braxton Sector. Missions to Morishim and Bothawui do not fall under this authority. I see. Disra looked at the 4th captain. You've been rather quiet, Captain Argona. The Iron Hand is of course under your command, Your Excellency, and we'll go wherever you send us, Argona said quietly. At the same time, I have to concur with Captain Trazyn's assessment. Sending away 4 of the Sector Fleet's 13 Star Destroyers is not something to be done lightly. Especially with 3 of them on this long-term mission to the Bothawui system, Trazyn added. The nature of which, I remind you, precludes any chance of a quick recall. Indeed, Argona said. You'd have to physically send couriers out there to contact us. In an emergency, the extra days that would cost could prove disastrous. Nothing worthwhile is ever gained without risk, Disra said coldly. I'm beginning to think that perhaps a wrong choice has been made in offering these missions to you. If you'd prefer to bow out of a history-making military campaign. No. The voice had come from the direction of Disra's secret passageway. The captains turned, and Grand Admiral Thrawn stepped into the office. There was a gasp from someone, choked off into a stunned silence. Excuse me, Admiral, Disra asked carefully. I said they will not be excused from this mission, Your Excellency, Thrawn said, his voice calm and cool as he walked to the desk and sat down in Disra's chair. I had my reasons for choosing these particular Star Destroyers and their captains. Those reasons have not changed. For a moment, his glowing eyes focused on the captains as they stood at obviously confused attention before him, measuring and evaluating each in turn. Then, leaning back in his seat, he smiled slightly. Observe, Your Excellency, he said, looking up at Disra and waving a hand at the officers. Utterly stunned by my unexpected appearance, yet already they are largely recovered. Quick and flexible minds, combined with utter loyalty to the Empire. That is the combination I need. The combination I will have. Of course, Admiral, Disra said. Thrawn turned his attention back to the captains. You have questions, of course, he said. Unfortunately, the one foremost in all your minds cannot at this time be answered. As I make preparations to return to open command, the methods which allow me to survive the assassination attempt 10 years ago must remain confidential. I must also ask that for the moment my return be kept a secret, to be shared only with your senior officers, and that only after you've left Imperial space. Other than that, he cocked his head slightly to the side. I believe there were some questions about command authority. No questions, Admiral, Trazyn said, his voice almost reverent. Not any more. Good. Thrawn cocked a blue-black eyebrow at Nalgol. I take it from your expression, Captain Nalgol, that you don't concur with your colleague. Nalgol cleared his throat self-consciously, his fingers squeezing his ring as if trying to extract confidence from the carved crest. I certainly don't question your authority, Admiral Thrawn, he said, but I would very much appreciate some clarification. I'm familiar with the Bothawui system, and I can think of no reason why it should be of any serious military value to the Empire. Certainly not worth tying up 3 Star Destroyers for. Your evaluation is quite correct, Thrawn agreed. It's not the system itself that interests me, but events which in the near future will be taking place over the Bothan homeworld. Events which I intend to turn to the Empire's advantage. Yes, sir, Nalgol said. But in time, all will be made clear, Thrawn said. For now, I must ask that you trust my judgment. Nalgol drew himself to his full height. Always, Admiral. He stepped forward and offered his hand across the desk. And if I may say so, welcome back. The Empire has sorely missed your leadership. As I have missed the privilege of command, Thrawn said, rising to his feet and gripping the proffered hand briefly. The refitting of your 3 Star Destroyers is already underway, and should be completed within 2 days. He shifted his attention to Dorja. As for your mission, Captain Dorja, the Imperial courier you're to intercept at Morisham is scheduled to leave in 20 hours. Will you have enough time to return to the Relentless and reach the system ahead of it? Easily, Admiral. Dorja's lip twitched in what passed for a smile with him these days. And if I may, sir, I'd like to echo Captain Nalgol's sentiments. I'm honored to once again serve under your direct command. Dizra looked at Dorja, his chest suddenly feeling tight. Dorja had served directly under Thrawn? I'm pleased to once again lead you, Captain, Thrawn said gravely. During my time on the Chimera, I often felt that you had more leadership potential than circumstances allowed you to develop. Perhaps we'll have the opportunity now to judge that evaluation. Dorja fairly glowed. I'll do my best to prove you right, sir. I can ask no more than your best, Thrawn said, and will accept nothing less, he added, looking at each of the captains in turn. You have your orders. Dismissed. Yes, Admiral, Trazyn said for all of them. They turned and left, in what seemed to Dizra to be a markedly more spirited step than with which they'd entered the office half an hour earlier. The double doors swung ponderously shut behind them. A fine group of gentlemen, Flynn declared, digging a finger into the collar of his white Grand Admiral's uniform. A bit gullible, perhaps, but fine gentlemen all the same. Oh, they're fine, all right, Dizra snarled, glaring at the secret door the con man had made his grand entrance through. They're also extremely dangerous. Tierce, where are you? Right here, Tierce said, stepping out of the secret door. What's the matter? What's the matter? Dizra snapped. Bad enough that 3 of the 4 captains you picked for these missions aren't particularly loyal to me. But someone who served directly with Thrawn? Are you insane? Don't be insulting, Tierce said coldly, joining the others by the desk. I had to bring in someone like Dorja on this. A junior student of tactics could tell you that. I don't think tactically, Dizra shot back. At least, not according to you. That's why your expertise is so necessary, remember? Calm down, Your Excellency, Flynn interjected, carefully popping the glowing surface insert out of his left eye. Sooner or later, it was inevitable that I face someone who personally knew Thrawn. What better time or place than here, where all 4 of them could have been dealt with quietly and discreetly if necessary? Exactly, Tierce said. And as to my choice of commanders, those not personally loyal to you are precisely the ones we need to work Flim's magic on. And have you considered what they might do once they're out of range of that magic? Disra countered. What if they decide they're not really convinced after all and do some checking? Oh, they're going to, Tierce assured him. That was why I wanted Nalgal to be the first in this group. He comes from a long line of Kuat nobility, and I knew he'd be wearing his poison injector ring. Flim paused midway through popping out the other surface insert. His what? His poison injector ring, Tierce repeated. Poisoning one's enemies is a centuries-old tradition there. Oh, relax. Nalgal hasn't carried any poison in that ring for years. I'm glad you think so, Flim said irritably, examining his hand closely where Nalgal had gripped it. It wasn't your hand he came over and... I said relax, Tierce said again, and this time there was an edge to his voice. He wasn't putting anything in. He was taking something out. A small skin sample, to be exact, Disra said, finally catching on, which he'll undoubtedly take straight over to the archives to compare against the genetic profile in Thrawn's ID records. Exactly, Tierce said. And once he's convinced, and he'll certainly share his findings with the others, there will be literally nothing they won't do for us. I wondered why you were so insistent we get those ID records altered last night, Disra said. Not exactly a large margin of error built into that operation. Especially considering the two of us were taking all the risks, Flim seconded, still cradling his hand. You weren't even in the room with us. Calm down, both of you, Tierce said, a hint of contempt in his tone. There's a long way yet to go on this. I hope you're not losing your nerve already. Don't worry about our nerve, Major, Disra bit out. You just worry about this strategy of yours actually working. It will, Tierce assured him. Trust me. Whatever the preliminary skirmishes, the opening battle of the rebellion's final civil war will be fought over Bathawui. The Kamas document will ensure that. We want to orchestrate the details of that blow-up as best we can, and we want an Imperial presence at Bathawui to make sure the damage to both sides is as extensive as possible. Well, whatever we do, we'd better do it quickly, Disra warned. Pelian's already 3/4 of the way to making my connection to the Kavrilhu pirates and their associates. If he does a check and finds my sector fleet missing 4 Star Destroyers, he's going to be all over me. There's not much we can do about the timetable, Tierce reminded him. The 3 heading to the Bathawui system won't be in attack position for several weeks. Then perhaps we should scrap the comet aspect, Disra said. They can form up around some other marker. There isn't one, Tierce said patiently. At least, nothing that would be safe for them to use. You'll just have to use your native charm to keep Pelion at bay. I'll do my best, Disra said sarcastically. And what sort of charm would you suggest I use on Captain Zothip? What's wrong with Captain Zothip? Flim asked. Major Tierce called and told him we were cutting off their supply of clones, Disra growled. Zothip is rather upset. We've been through this once already, Tierce said with an air of strained patience. We need those clones ourselves now. Zothip has no cause to complain. He's benefited well enough from having them aboard his ships. Anyway, what are you worried about? That he'll come here and demand satisfaction? You don't know Zothip, Disra said heavily. He's scum from the fringe, Tierce said, dismissing the pirate with a twist of his lip. Buy him off or calm him down. I don't care which. I'm less worried about Zothip than I am about your attitude, Disra countered. From now on, major decisions like this are going to be made jointly. I won't have you tearing down things I built and then handing me the pieces to put back together. For a long moment, Tierce just looked at him. Let's get one thing straight right now, Disra, he said at last, his voice icy smooth. I'm in command of the military aspects of this operation. All of them. That's what you offered me, and that's what I'm taking. Your part right now, your only part right now, is to supply the ships and men I need, and to handle any political aspects that crop up. Disra glared again at him, but it was a glare whose edge he could feel blunting. Just what sort of monster had he created here? Is that all I am to you? He asked Tierce quietly. Your supply officer. Tierce smiled, a cold twitch at the corner of his lip. Afraid you've lost control of the scheme you've created. Don't be. My goal here, my only goal, is to avenge the Emperor's death and wipe the rebellion off every map of the galaxy. After that, my job is done. Ruling the new empire that emerges will be entirely up to you. For a moment, Disra eyed him, trying to read past his stony expression, trying not to let wishful thinking color his judgment. If the man was lying... No. Tierce was a soldier, an uncommonly good one, but a soldier nonetheless. He had nowhere near the political skills or experience Disra himself possessed. Even if he grew to like the taste of power, he would still need Disra after the fighting was over. Most triumvirates are unstable, Your Excellency, Flim spoke up. I know. I've seen many of them rise and collapse among pirate and smuggler organizations in the fringe. But this one is different. None of us can make it work without both of the others. He's right, Tierce agreed. So shut up your whining and do your part, or it'll be penal colonies for all of us. Agreed, Disra said reluctantly. My apologies, Major. It won't happen again. Good, Tierce said briskly. Back to business. I'm going to need a copy of the decryption algorithm you used to slice into the Emperor's and Thrawn's private records. Disra frowned. What for? So that I can pull a complete list of the sleeper cells Thrawn planted around the rebellion, Tierce explained. We're going to need all the trained Imperial soldiers and pilots we can get our hands on. That seemed reasonable enough. All right, Disra said, but I can pull the list for you. It would be useful if I could get into those files myself whenever I needed to, Tierce pointed out. It would also be useful for me to know a few things that you don't, Disra countered. For the sake of balance and all. Tierce shook his head. Fine. Go ahead and play your little games. Just get me that list. Disra inclined his head in an ironic bow. Immediately, Major. No, there would be no more outbursts, Disra decided as he walked back across the office to the secret tunnel. But that didn't mean he wouldn't keep a close eye on his partners in this triumvirate. And if they both still needed him, the time might well come when he no longer needed them. It was something to think about. And that's the end of the chapter.